Greetings and welcome to the United States Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II, and I am the chairman of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Here we hold conversations with some of the world's leading thinkers in longevity, science, technology, philosophy, and politics. Like the philosophers of the Age of Enlightenment, we aim to connect every field of human endeavor and arrive at new insights to achieve longer lives, greater rationality, and the progress of our civilization. Greetings and welcome to our U.S. Transhumanist Party Virtual Enlightenment Salon of Sunday, April 21st, 2024. Today's salon is going to be focused on space travel and the prospects for humankind to become a spacefaring civilization in recognition of the many obstacles and challenges involved in this endeavor. And we have a distinguished panel of U.S. Transhumanist Party officers joining us today, including our Director of Visual Art, Art Ramon Garcia, our Director of Longevity Outreach, Ben Ballweg, our 2024 presidential candidate and Director of Sentient Rights Advocacy, Tom Ross, our 2024 Vice Presidential candidate and Director of Citizen and Community Science, Daniel Tweed, and our Legislative Director, Jason Geringer. Our special guest today is none other than Mike DiVerde. Mike DiVerde is both a futurist and a rocket engineer. He is the CEO of the Washington State Transhumanist Party, and he seeks to transcend human limitations by overcoming aging and enhancing cognition. He works at Boeing and has worked at SpaceX, so certainly there is nobody more qualified to discuss the subjects that we have in store for you today. He also coordinates the OmniFuturists group, and we held a salon with the OmniFuturists on January 28th. Please check out their Future Visions book. It's quite fascinating in terms of various perspectives on the concept of the economic singularity. So thank you very much, Mike, for joining us today. I'm sure this is going to be a fascinating and lively conversation. I understand that you have a presentation for us as well, so please begin.
Thanks, Gennady. Thanks, everybody, for having me on today. Gennady, I think I'd like to present the first set of, no, the other presentation. Is it possible that we can switch? I just sent a second one. No?
No, I think we're going to need to do some rearrangement to make that happen. Can we begin with your first set of slides?
Sure, we can. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to talk about a little bit of some of the really high risks to traveling in space. And one of the things that I wanted to do is talk about one of the good ways to prepare for one of the types of risks that occurs out there in space that we all know about, micrometeoroid and orbital debris. Now, the other set of slides that we're going to look at some point is going to be about my career. So I'll just spout it real quick so you guys kind of know what I've worked on in the past. So my degree is in aeronautical and astronautical engineering from the University of Illinois. That was a long time ago. That was 40 years ago. But I did take classes like orbital mechanics, rocket propulsion, structures, aerodynamics, electrical. So anyway, I had a lot of exposure to that. But when I started right away on a Navy jet. I designed some new primary structure. I started when I was about 21. And then the next project I was on was the space station, International Space Station. This was about 1990. And I was the primary structure lead engineer on the truss, one of the primary structure lead engineers on the truss. And so that slide that Gennady was showing happened to be for ISS shielding. And I happened to be involved with that back in 1990. So I'm going to try to describe micrometeoroids and orbital debris real quick. They come at two different speeds. Orbital debris tends to be on the order of like 18,000 miles an hour at impact. And micrometeoroids, of course, come from more like interstellar space or somewhere inside our solar system. They're going faster, about 22,000 miles an hour. And so that's pretty well known. And you might wonder what that is. So orbital debris turns out to be mostly paint chips. Earlier in, say, the 70s, 60s, and 70s, when rockets went up into space, they did not vent all their fuel. They didn't have a design for that. Once the fuel had been burnt, they were on orbit. There's always a little bit of fuel in the tank. So what? Who cares? Well, with thermal cycling, eventually these tanks would thermal fatigue and crack, and the pressure inside would make them burst. And so this tank would burst, and all these pieces would go scattering all over an orbit. And most of it was paint chips. A lot of the metal part would come back down to Earth and burn up, but the paint chips tend to stay up there. Orbital debris is one type of problem that you have on impacts. The other is micrometeoroids. Think of those more as like dust, okay? So this is well known. So what did NASA do? They built a test facility on the ground that they can simulate those things going 18, 20,000 miles an hour and impacting different designs and see, hey, what stops this? And so the design I was involved with is called a Whipple shield. And believe it or not, this stuff comes in at that speed, and it's basically two plates of aluminum, a thin aluminum plate and a thicker aluminum plate. The thinner aluminum plate, when it hits, vaporizes it. It becomes a plasma, a cone of plasma that it spreads out, and it impacts on the back shield and stops it. So two little sheets of aluminum stops these really devastating impacts. And this is something that NASA prepared for. They built tests, they made specimens, they proved that the design actually worked. Okay? So that's one way to do it, to avoid disaster. And we know that sometimes the astronauts in the space station have to shelter in a particular location, either for micrometeoroids or orbital debris, or for like some of these social, solar events. If there's some sort of coronal ejection from the sun, there's a stream of plasma coming at the Earth that's a dangerous level, they shelter in place. So there's some things out there in space that clearly NASA has prepared for, and then there's other ones that they have not. So that's kind of going to be the topic for today, is some of the things that appear to me that NASA has not prepared for, that are high-risk events in space travel, and what probably we ought to do about it. Okay, so I don't know, Gennady, if it's possible to run that video of the micrometeoroid.
Our sun is constantly blasting huge amounts of hot plasma out into space. All those charged particles have a big effect on everything in their path. So what's protecting Earth from the solar wind and solar storms? Earth's thick atmosphere provides some defense, scattering and absorbing solar particles before they reach the surface. But our planet also has a secret weapon, a strong magnetic field it projects into space, mostly generated by molten iron alloys moving in Earth's outer core. The area of space where the magnetic field interacts with the solar wind is called Earth's magnetosphere. Its shape constantly changes as it's bombarded by solar particles. As positively charged protons and negatively charged electrons enter the magnetosphere, most of them are deflected around Earth, long before they reach the atmosphere. The magnetosphere really gets tested when big solar storms, carrying more plasma and traveling at higher speeds, are on a collision course with Earth. While most of the plasma is deflected, some of it gets trapped in the magnetosphere and funnels back toward Earth along field lines emanating from the poles. As charged particles from the sun collide with nitrogen and oxygen molecules in our atmosphere, they create the cosmic light shows known as auroras. The bigger the storm, the further from the poles auroras can be seen. Some storms are so big, they interfere with satellites, cause planes to alter their routes, and can create other problems. The vast majority of the time, these inconveniences are pretty minor. But the next time the solar version of a perfect storm overwhelms Earth's magnetic shield, we might not be so lucky.
And so, that was a very good description of how some of the radiation interacts with our magnetic field on Earth. And that is part of what we're going to be discussing today is the unique position we have on Earth. Let's go back to maybe the start of the problem. When the Apollo missions were going on, there were reports coming back from some of the lunar astronauts that, well, they were sleeping on the flight to the moon. They're in a darkened area, their eyes are closed and they're sleeping, and suddenly there's a bright flash. Okay, even though their eyes are closed, they're seeing a bright flash. Buzz Aldrin was the first one to report this. Give him credit for taking the risk of being mocked as a nut for talking about having your eyes closed and seeing flashes. I believe that in about 2006, 80% of the space station astronauts reported seeing these sorts of flashes. Okay, so what we were concerned about back then was what is causing this. And what they've determined over the years is galactic cosmic radiation, not from the sun, but from somewhere out in our galaxy. And what happens is a star will explode. It goes supernova, and it explodes in all directions, obviously, and they occur in different parts of the galaxy, so they kind of come in from all kinds of different directions. What they've determined is that some of these, they're all ions. Electrons are stripped off. Most of them are hydrogen. I think it's like 60%, about 10% are helium. But then you start getting some of the heavier atoms as well, because when the star explodes, all the elements in it are included. So, for example, some titanium atoms are included. And yesterday I found out that one of them that they've detected is actually radioactive iron. So radioactive iron ions, and they travel at a good fraction of the speed of light. So this is the kind of exotic element that you're dealing with as a danger as an astronaut. And what happens is there's virtually no shielding, just static shielding that can stop this stuff, okay? Why don't we feel that? That's what this video was telling you, is that we have an iron core, the liquid portion of it is moving, it creates a magnetic field, and the magnetic field protects us. That's why when we're sleeping, we don't see flashes. But once you get outside Earth's magnetosphere, you are now going to be interacting with these. So there's no real good shielding that can protect you. And when it does, these ions traveling at nearly the speed of light, some of them will hit an eye nerve of yours and pass through, or they'll hit your occipital cortex. And what is that? That's your brain. So we know that there's brain damage going on. As the ion goes through, it's positively charged. It's interacting with your cell membranes. The structures of your cells are getting ripped apart as it flies through. Now, what we're going to talk about a little bit later is, this has been known since 1972, basically, and where are we in preparing for this? I want everybody to understand that I'm a very big space enthusiast. I was about 6 when I watched Buzz Aldrin and others hopping around on the moon. About 5th grade, I decided I wanted to be a rocket scientist. I love the idea of space travel. But I want to make sure that what we do is we do it logically and effectively and safely, and not just go out there because somebody wants to put 1 million people on Mars. Okay? Because what could happen is either during the trip to Mars or on Mars or on the moon for long terms, they could have brain damage. And what I've done in our Discord channel is I've put a number of research papers where people who are actually, I am a rocket scientist, I'm an engineer, I am not an astrophysicist, I'm not an astrobiologist. So what I've done is I've placed some of these research papers on our Discord channel that indicate the concerns that people have about deadly levels of radiation exposure during long trips to Mars. And just to set the stage for these trips, the shortest trip we know of from here to Mars is about 6 months. Now, Earth and Mars have different orbits. They're spinning around. The shortest is 6 months. As time goes by, they get farther apart and the trip is longer. And this is why there's been some discussion about launching armadas of spacecraft about every 2 years, because that's when they have their closest approach. So once you head towards Mars, you got the 6 months minimum trip, and then you're kind of stuck there for a couple years until the two planets get closer again, and then you could maybe come back. Okay, so you're talking about years of exposure to radiation, and my concern has been that, we don't have enough preparation that we've done to enable us to know for sure that the people going there will be protected from galactic cosmic rays. Okay, so that first one was actually about the magnetosphere and its interaction with the sun. Gennady, maybe we could try and it's my fault, I didn't set up the videos in the right order. So play the next one if you can, and let's see what we got. I think there's 3 different videos that I wanted to show. The one I'm after is probably the last one. No, okay. So this is a video of an actual hypervelocity impact that NASA did. They did it on the ground to prove, before you fly astronauts up to the space station, that the typical types of orbital debris and micrometeoroids are actually going to be intercepted and people will be safe. And this is all I'm trying to say is we're at this moment not ready to go to Mars. We don't have the right techniques or technology. We haven't done the right experiments, and we do not have the data and the proof that these people will be relatively safe. Okay, there's probably a third video in there. Let's run that third video and just see what I plopped 3 videos that I thought might be useful, and I think this was probably Ben Ballwig's idea on this third one here.
Yikes and away! 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 Who are you? Now then, yikes and away!
Okay, so here's the point of this video is there's 2 ways we could do, well, there's many different ways, but let's talk about 2 different ways we could do this. One, we could say, oh, we got to go to Mars immediately or we're all going to die, and send 1 million people to Mars, and then a lot of them die. Let's say the first group goes off. Let's say they get 1,000 on the first trip. There's 1,000 people there, and some of them come back a couple years later. They go to see their doctor. Heavy duty brain damage. A lot of them have obvious levels of cancer developing. And then there's finally an investigation that says, Well, what's happened is they've been exposed to very high levels, as you'll see in the research papers, high levels of radiation, and this is what has caused the damage to them. They weren't properly protected. Now, they probably were silly enough to sign away their rights. That's not the problem. The problem is going to be that there will be an outcry of who should have made sure before these people lifted off Earth that they were properly protected. There was a very recent article that the FAA decided that they're now going to license vehicles that are going to re-enter before they take off. Duh. Because they had an episode in which somebody flew up there on a rocket, wanted to come back, but didn't have the right re-entry license. And the FAA said we had some lessons learned. And this is, as you know, a very typical pattern with regulation is somebody will say, I want to do this something new. There'll be an objection, but the person says there's no law against it. And so they go do that. And then there's an outcry, public outcry over the results. American citizens are being killed on Mars because the FAA, the NASA, whoever has not vetted the technology prior to implementing it. The yoiks in the way is us launching off and doing something before we're properly prepared. That's the point of the cartoon, okay? The other version of life is like you've seen with the micrometeoroid, you test a series of possible solutions on Earth. Perhaps they built this galactic cosmic ray simulating lab in 2018, just a few years ago, that can do more than just hydrogen. It can do multiple types of elements and then expose things like poor little mice. And so my beautiful wife will be very unhappy about this, but we have to use some lab animals to see what is the real impact on biological specimens to see what the results are, right? And so part of it is what is the percentage of blockage you get from a particular design, and the other is what are the impacts to that biological entity, right? And so what I'm trying to advocate is until we have a design that shows that we can shield against these galactic cosmic rays, that people are relatively safe from that type of exposure, only until we've prepared that, then we are ready. Part of getting ready would be sending robot spacecraft to Mars, to Moon, right? Multiple different types of shielding, and get actual on-location data on what is the exposed radiation levels, what is the effect over many years of being exposed to radiation, to solar flares, to the vacuum of space, the thermal cycling. You want to have an awareness ahead of time that whatever sort of habitat you build up is safe, right? I think that one of the examples we're about to talk about for a potential solution is using some brand new superconducting materials to create a magnetic shield. Okay, and one of the questions you have is, okay, apparently it's superconducting and has to be kept at cryogenic temperatures. How does it do long-term in space, this material? Give you an idea of how little measurement has been done. Curiosity rover included a sensor for galactic cosmic rays. I think it was 2012 or something like this. And so they were actually able to start measuring on a flight to Mars, what is the radiation level? And one of the, and I, having done a number of designs over the years, I understand that there's a balance that you've got to take. And so the location of that sensor was apparently not ideal. And so there is some shielding provided by the rover itself and trying to extricate the data and apply it to when you make a a vehicle that flies all the way to Mars and using that data with different shielding, how does it work, right? So we haven't done enough with relatively cheap and safe robots to measure the environment, to check out solutions, and to be certain. Because as a transhumanist, I believe in superlongevity. I think that no one's life should be foreshortened for any reason, not even the grand scheme of colonizing Mars, okay? I mean, everybody's life is precious and I want it to be protected. That's why one of my interests is in how can we do better with the homeless. Being homeless can limit your life by on the order of 8 years, right? This is just not a good thing for somebody who wants to see people living for centuries, okay? So that's a wide-ranging, serpentine way of describing what's on my mind. I should probably stop. I have this bad habit of babbling a lot. Stop for a minute and ask for comments and questions before we keep going, okay?
Yes, certainly. And thank you, Mike, for the beginning of your presentation. These are certainly some fascinating and important considerations. And with regard to NASA's solution to space debris, Mike Lezine writes, a simple solution for a complex situation, and he is loving that. But he also wonders if Elon Musk is thinking about the galactic cosmic radiation problem, since he is pushing for mankind to go to Mars. What is your assessment of that and where Elon Musk's thinking is at?
Yeah, so Mike Lezine, love you, dude. In Discord, I did have a quote from Elon, and I can't remember particularly which year it was, but he said, I'm going to paraphrase, going to Mars is going to be tough. Some people are going to die, but it's going to be great if it works. Okay. And so there is a group of people who believe that, like in the 1500s and 1600s, if you got onto a ship and went across the Atlantic to colonize, a lot of you died, but for the greater good of humanity. And I think that might have worked 500 years ago, but I think it's an idiotic approach in this day and age. Okay. If we're going to spend billions of dollars going to colonize another planet, let's at least try to do some simple things to make people safer. No one here is trying to say that you have to guarantee that no one's hurt. That's impossible. We all know that space is difficult. What I'm trying to say is, if you know there's a known hazard that over long-term periods could foreshorten people's life, make them sick, kill them, you have an obligation to try to do something to prevent those deaths. I'll give you a real good example from the past. Asbestos is a really good insulator, and we used it all over the place, right? We didn't know any better, okay? Okay, that's a good quote, right? A bunch of people will probably die going to Mars, right? Okay, that's his attitude. I don't like it, okay? I think that's a very poor attitude of, oh, well, I'll still have my billions. Those poor suckers died. Okay, all right. So I think that we need to focus on providing a rational set of protections. And by the way, when we get back to my slides, we showed the first slide, which shows some of the other things that are going on, and there is active work going on. The problem is it's very new. So perhaps, Gennady, you could put that back up and we'll go through a few more of those things. So slide 2 then. I just did it a few minutes ago. Okay, so this was in case the video didn't work. Galactic cosmic rays hit a 50-year high. This was relatively recently. We don't know much about what we're talking about here, folks, okay? Okay. And the reason I say that is, you notice, maybe you can't read it too well, but they've shown Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 where they are location relative to our solar system. And there's a bow shock, and there's a heliosphere, heliopause. Here's the thing is we are just starting to find out what is the galaxy doing to us and our solar system, right? We don't know, right? So anyway, that was kind of a picture way outside our solar system. These galactic cosmic rays are bombarding us from all kinds of different directions. And by the way, this is a good picture for you to think about the shape of the shield, whatever's protecting us. This is true on the Earth's magnetosphere. As the sun it spews out its material and radiation towards us, it changes the shape of the magnetosphere to more like this teardrop type shape. And it varies in intensity, right? A solar flare is going to press down on it and make it smaller. It's a dynamic system. So the magnetosphere is changing shape and orientation all the time. When I was a kid, when they first found the Van Allen radiation belts, they kind of described them as a static sphere around us. Why? Because they threw a satellite through it and detected it on the way out and thought, oh, okay, at 100 miles, we hit this thing. It must be all the way around us. Well, that's not how it works. Okay, you can't say something simple like the Van Allen radiation belts are between 150 and 160 miles. It's a dynamic and changing environment. Okay, let's try the next slide. See what the hell I put in there. Okay, so this is the brand new Galactic Cosmic Ray Lab where they can simulate not just hydrogen hydrogen ions traveling at nearly the speed of light, but helium and titanium, and I don't think they use the radioactive iron, but they probably use iron ions. And this is a place where you can, over time, you can train these on different types of shielding designs and see what happens. You need to experiment like this, iterate through options until you find something that is lightweight, low energy, cheap, and efficient, okay? And we'll talk about that in a second. So next slide. Okay, so here is one of the recent versions of how this might work, okay? I think this is a slide from an article from 2022. Ben Baldwin can take great pride in the University of Wisconsin at Madison because it's researchers there that came up with this thing. And what this is a series of these superconducting coils in a circle, if you will, around a spacecraft, creating kind of a donut magnetic shield. And apparently the way that they've arranged it is the magnetic field only extends outward and not inwards, because one of the things you don't want to do is have an intense magnetic field that is going in towards the spacecraft, because it'll affect telecommunications, and we still don't know the impact on telecommunications, but computers, any sort of biomedical devices, we still don't know what the effect biologically of very intense magnetic fields on people are. So there's a lot to this that is unknown. Well, one of the interesting things about this is one of those little ovals weighs on the order of about 6,000 pounds. There are 8 of them here, so let's say it's 50,000 pounds. The spacecraft that they're designing it for is the Lunar Gateway. And this thing in the center is a module that's about 3 meters in diameter. This is tiny. This is a tiny little spacecraft with 50,000 pounds of equipment to provide a shield. Now, the shield is, as I said, a torus. And what I don't know yet is, okay, the galactic cosmic rays come from all directions. You've protected around this one circle. What's happening to the galactic cosmic rays coming right at your nose or right up your tail? Okay, it's not a sphere. Okay, so to do a sphere, how many more do you need, right? Okay, and then certainly nobody's sending, and by the way, this is only sized for 4 people, right? Nobody's talking about putting 100 people in here, right? So if you're sending 100 people at a time in a spacecraft, what are you spending? £500,000 on magnetic field equipment? I mean, there's no spacecraft designer in the universe who's going to say, oh yeah, $500,000 for magnetic protection, we're good to go, okay? Right? So the problems that they've had with the magnetic shielding have always been on the order of either weight or the amount of energy. Let's say it's an active magnetic field that you're powering, or the cost, or the length of time, or even worse, politicians' lack of interest in using government money to do the research. Okay? These things ebb and flow in terms of interest. But this is, as far as I can tell, the closest we've gotten so far to, and it's not a bad concept, it's just heavy. Okay? All right, so thanks for going through those slides, Gennady, and I'll take some more questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Mike, for those considerations, for bringing them to our attention. We did have a bit more of a discussion on Elon Musk in the chat. Dan Elton, our director of scholarship, writes, I hate to say this, but the truth is that Elon has been a bit dismissive of radiation risk. He has talked about using magnetic fields during transit and burying habitats underground, though. And I'll ask for your thoughts on these options, Mike. But Dan Tweed also writes in our internal chat that Elon Musk had stated, quote, I plan to die on Mars, hopefully not on impact. So it's not really the case that he himself wants to protect himself from the risk of dying on Mars either. And of course, one of my concerns with Elon's recent public statements has been how he has, in a rather superficial way, been critical of the prospects for human longevity by stating that, oh, we need people to die in order to get fresh ideas. So my assessment of Elon Musk's outlook is that human longevity is not one of his top priorities. He thinks of pushing human civilization forward, and he thinks that the cost may be worth it. But he has been somewhat thinking about possible solutions. So what do you think of these two options that Elon apparently has considered?
Yeah, so Dan Elton, very good. And let me also say this. I've been saying this for a while, and I haven't said it recently. If you go to Mars, you might as well dig a tunnel here on Earth and live underground in a mine for the rest of your life, because it is exceedingly clear that anybody on Mars, it's not going to be like the movie The Martian where you live in a nice dome on the top. The micrometeoroid and orbital debris is much worse on Mars. So you're going to have impacts all the time. You've got the solar radiation that we're not going to discuss today because there's some good ways to protect yourself against that, including having a lot of material between you and the radiation. So being underground saves you from radiation risk, micrometeoroid, forget about orbital debris, that's a man-made problem. So, or asteroid impacts or micrometeoroid impacts. Okay, so you're going to be living underground the whole time. And I suspect that this is why he made the Boeing company. Okay, it's kind of why I think he's involved with Tesla. If you're on a different planet, you can't count on having gasoline to power your vehicles. Okay, if you're going to live underground, you better know how to tunnel through the earth. Okay, so a lot of the things that he does sound oddball. His solar roof company, there is a thread through all of this. So yes, you'll be living underground your entire life on Mars is my viewpoint. Okay, and every time you go outside, you're going to be risking that you get baked or fried by the radiation. Okay, using magnetic shield is something that I think it's the only way that works with galactic cosmic radiation. And he may be thinking about it. The problem is getting a solution that is cost effective and weight effective. Because if you're trying to transmit food and equipment and people and water to Mars to live for a couple of years, tell me you've got room for 500,000 pounds of magnetic shielding. Now, one of the things is it could be dual use. If the equipment used to shield you would be useful, if you tore it apart and used it on Mars, that's a different thing, right? You'd be transporting something useful. I think this is partly why Starship is made out of stainless steel, is that'd be a really good material to have on the surface of Mars if you wanted to build anything, for example. Okay, so both of those seem reasonable to me. Yeah. What's next? What do we want to discuss next?
Yes, indeed. Thank you for those responses. And Dan Elton writes that regarding living underground on Earth, Robin Hansen has suggested that is an easier way to safeguard human life than going to Mars.
Right.
And Dan also points out that many people do see a synergy between the Boeing company and the SpaceX Mars plans. Daniel Tweed writes, not dying is always the most cost-effective option. And I agree with him on that, but he also points out that the freedom to engage in risky activities is part of the quality of life. And I want to get your thought on risk assessment from the standpoint of people in different situations or with different temperaments. Some fraction of humanity is always going to have this pioneering desire, the desire to reach new destinations, to be where no man has gone before, and essentially to make their mark on the universe in that manner. And this may, especially in the case of hazardous activities, apply to people who might for other reasons believe they have a shortened life expectancy. For instance, people who are terminally ill but still capable of doing something. So if somebody has a terminal cancer diagnosis and was given 4 years to live, but this person could still take a flight to Mars and do some work building the Mars colony before this person succumbs to the cancer. What do you think about the possibility of sending volunteers, of course, in those situations to undertake these kinds of risky and potentially hazardous activities in the long term?
Yes. So I was anticipating this with a bunch of libertarians. This had to come up. And so I have a somewhat facetious scenario for everybody to think about. Okay. And I'm going to call on my pal Gennady. Chairman Gennady, he's going to be the example in this parable. Okay, so let's say that a guy who's a really good marathoner who lives in Nevada, okay, like Gennady is, he decides he wants to go to Black Rock Desert for Burning Man. Now, everybody stop and think about Gennady and his bow tie at Burning Man, okay? It's like August 25th, and he decides, okay, everybody else is coming down from their highs. I'm not high because I don't do drugs. Good for you, Gennady. He's going to go for a run. It's 6:30 in the morning and it's 95 degrees already. And he didn't pack properly. He doesn't have his water bottle. He doesn't know Black Rock Desert as well as he should, but he knows he can run forever. So he starts running. He's got no water, no phone, nothing. It's just him. He was going to go for a little one, but he gets lost. He turns right when he should have turned left. And he's a libertarian, so he always turns right. Okay, so he's lost, and the temperature has risen through the day, and it's now 122 degrees at 3:30 p.m. Now, Dan Tweed, there are no laws against that, are there? He can do that. Nobody can stop him from running around in the desert with no water in 120 degree temperatures. That's clear. That's his freedom. He can do that. Now, let's make a new example using my pal, Daniel Tweed. So Tweed Enterprises offers to guide Burning Man people on a running tour of Black Rock Desert secrets for $250 per person. Same scenario. Black Rock Desert, Burning Man, August 25th. They all go for a run It's 95 at 6:30. None of them brought water because they were all tripping last night. They get lost. It's 122 at 3:30. 6 are hospitalized and 3 die. Tweed Enterprises is liable. That's how that works. Okay? It's one thing if you want to build your own rocket and go to Mars, land yourself, crash on entry, whatever, that's your problem. But in order for a company to provide this service, they're liable for their deaths. Now, let's say a billionaire is able to buy the oligarchy out, convinces them to let them start. And the earlier example I gave, 1,000 people go to Mars, 2 years later they come back. A bunch of them have brain tumors. Some of them have died. The autopsies reveal that, yes, it was radiation. There'll be not maybe, I'm sure that the lawyers for a company like SpaceX will make sure that they're not liable, but the outcry is going to be unsustainable. What happened? Why are American citizens dying on Mars? Why did we do this? We should have been taking care of the good homeless people on Earth. Why are we spending billions of dollars doing this? Okay, so this is the yoiks in a way problem, is that you rush off to do something half-baked, you fail, and now you have smeared the attempt for Mars exploration for decades to come. People will think that that is where you go to die, that there's no way to do it properly. As versus taking your time and making sure people are safe as best you possibly can. And then, building on that development. It'll take a little bit longer. And the question that I've been asking is, what's the rush? Humanoids have been pretty active for thousands of years. Why would we think in the next 20 years we're all going to get wiped out? That's silly. That is a silly scenario based on nothing. Okay? What I'm suggesting is spend 20 years properly developing a system that makes people safe. Investigate some of the effects. We haven't even started talking about low gravity on next generations. We've been talking about radiation. There's a series of things that we haven't evaluated properly. And so I love the idea of going to space and exploring and doing things. But I think that there are some practical limitations on, well, it's my right to go die. Well, yeah, okay, yes. But a company will be found liable if they haven't properly prepared for the environment. Something, let's say, maybe could have been easily predicted. I'll give you an example. There was a Space Shuttle Challenger launch in January when it was too cold. And there were engineers from Thiokol who said, don't launch, it's too cold. They launched anyway because they were trying to make rate. And what happened? The Space Shuttle program got shut down for years while they tried to figure out what they did wrong and how to never let that happen again. Okay? The following shuttle disaster was because of some foam debris that came off. Right? And that ended the program, and it ended all American flights into space for a long time to come. See, we've done the yoiks in a way problem several times now, and we keep getting these setbacks because we're rushing ahead without being prepared. Okay, so Gennady, thanks for being a nice guy while I used you as an example, but this is serious, right? It's not a guaranteed right to be able to sell at what, $100,000 or $200,000 a ticket, the right to go kill yourself on a planet. Okay. What's next?
Well, thank you for that reply, Mike. And by the way, I do always bring a water bottle with me when I run. My question is, would it be sufficient in the desert heat, or would I need to replenish it at an aid station somewhere, or find water sources along the way for a long run?
I was thinking he should have had something happen to your water supply on the way, and it was just an accident, because he would have brought water.
But maybe Tweed Enterprises would not have, right? Okay, so Gennady is in a sense, he was a very good sport about this, but he's a very good example of somebody who runs in desert conditions. But a lot of people aren't smart, and they'll do dumb things. I got one more example for you all to consider. We all know people along the Gulf Coast, the East Coast, who are right there on the coast, and the weatherman says there is a colossal hurricane coming. It's huge. We all have to abandon. You all have to evacuate. And there's always one guy who says, I'm going to ride it out. That's horseshit. Somebody's going to come along and steal my TV set, okay? Until the storm really hits its peak, and then he says, I'm in trouble, come get me. And then the poor emergency crews have to try to drive out into this horrible weather to save this 55, 65-year-old guy who's in a trailer on the coast from being killed, okay? People claim that they'll be fine even if they die until it gets dire, and then they want to be rescued, okay? So I'm not buying this stuff about, there's 1,000 people willing to die on Mars, okay? No, I don't believe it. 3 maybe, okay? But most of the people going there probably don't understand the risks they're taking that well.
And we do hope that as few people as possible die on Mars. And Dan Elton writes, these are all great points. If people die on Mars, there will be a massive backlash. Now, he wonders if perhaps genetic engineering could address some of these issues. So, for instance, with CRISPR gene editing, some people say it might be able to make us more resistant to radiation, like tardigrades are. So, Mike, what do you think about the potential of not sending our current version of humans, but genetically modified humans, and those could include volunteers who undergo these modifications to be more radiation resistant?
Yeah, so now I'm going to go off in a very odd tangent, and let's separate 2 things here. One is, what is likely and logical right now being between now and 2040, and ever or into the far future, okay? Now, obviously, there hasn't been enough work done to show that this is safe today, okay? To do these sort of modifications, genetic engineering, I think that he's on the right track. As he knows very well, it would take a long time to develop those techniques and show that it's safe for those people. I think that there are people who are going to want this. As transhumanists, we all want the upgrades, right? I do, okay? And I keep waiting for my rejuvenation from David Sinclair, right? At Harvard, right? I mean, there's a lot of things that could make it a lot easier for us to do this stuff, and biological improvements to be able to go into space and be safe. I'm all for that, and I'm looking forward to that. I'm going to go a step farther too. Many of you know that I can't wait for my mind upload also. Okay, and I plan to be uploaded into 10 mechanical robots. In fact, for the splash for this episode, that was a piece of art that I did with my friend Midjourney of me standing on Mars, and I couldn't convince Midjourney to put a helmet on me. Okay, so when I looked at it, I said, well, obviously on Mars, I can't breathe, right? So that's a really bad image. But then I realized if I made these mechanical robots kind of look like me, okay, and they're going to be me. See, this is where Gennady and I are going to talk about I-ness, and I don't believe in a self, okay? All 10 of these mechanical robots will be me, okay? Different instantiations, but we're all one collective Mike DiVerde. Okay, that's how far out I go, folks. So anyway, one of these robots I am going to send to Mars, and he's going to be walking around. He doesn't have to breathe. He doesn't care about. Some of the computer programming could have upsets from radiation. So that'll be interesting. He's going to have backup systems and reboot systems and so forth. But I think mechanical versions of me will be walking around on Mars. And I think that that's a great way. I'm a big proponent of robotic exploration of space. And I got a third version to just really make you all laugh. Once I've got an upload, now I'm software. Okay, that's really all I am. So let's say that I've gotten the rejuvenation from Sinclair multiple times. It's a couple hundred years from now. And we've sent a spacecraft all the way to Alpha Centauri. My mind upload can be loaded into a device that sends a laser beam towards Alpha Centauri. And for those 4 years that light beam is traveling with my software, I don't experience time. That instantiation of me does not experience any time. When it does start experiencing time again, those 4 years went in a second. And it gets to that spacecraft and it gets uploaded into a bot at Alpha Centauri. Now I'm standing at Alpha Centauri. That's me, not someone else, Gennady. That's me standing at Alpha Centauri. Okay, I have just done instantaneous space travel across 4 light years. Okay, there are ways to do this, folks. Okay, some of it is science fiction, some of it's fantasy. Okay, some of it's going to take centuries to develop. Mind uploading is not going to be straightforward, but once we get there, okay, think of the things that we can do. Okay, I love all of this stuff. What I don't love is people going to die on that hill. And Mars is not one of those that in the next 10 years, we got to go die on that hill. That's all I'm trying to say. Okay. So another really long, silly explanation for you, Gennady, but that's how I think. Okay.
Yes. Well, this is fascinating. And here we have our friend. Let me see if I can show him. Here he is, Mike DiVerde, on Mars, and we have in one of the little windows here biological Mike DiVerde speaking with us as well. So imagine that this Mike DiVerde is on Mars right now, and how does biological Mike DiVerde experience him?
Oh, okay. Well, that's very good. So one of the things that one of the classes I took was quantum mechanics a couple years ago. Now, I'm not good at quantum mechanics, but one of the things that I think quantum technology is going to give us is possibilities of instantaneous communication across great distances. The way that I think about these robots and their computer programming is that they can think much faster than us. I suspect that when we get to the point of mind uploading, that those thought processes, it can work millions of times faster than my neurons firing. Okay. Well, if that's possible, then what could happen is each night there's 10 robots and me. So the 11 of us have a seance in which the bots share their day in its entirety, and everybody else can consume, not the biological me, of course, but the rest of them can consume that day in seconds, and they go through their sequence. Each of them shares their day. They've now all totally experienced the other's experiences, whether the robot was walking on a trench, Mariana Trench in the bottom of the Pacific, or if they were at the Eiffel Tower in Paris, if they were on Mars or Alpha Centauri. They all get to share. Now, you're going to point out there's a time delay with the Alpha Centauri, and you're right. He's going to be 4 years out of sync. Okay, light only goes so fast so far. What'll be interesting is, does the quantum communication, is it instantaneous across 4 light years? I don't know. Okay, but anyway, so we will all have the same experience 100%. The biological me is going to have to get a condensed version, kind of like a TikTok version of everybody else's days. Okay, but we're all going to share in it, and we're all going to experience it. So we'll all 11 of us will be one Mike DiVerde. Okay, and I do not believe in a self. I do not believe in I-ness. That's what Gennady and I are kidding about right now. Is he believes in I-ness, and that's why a mind upload is just a copy. And I say, no, it is not a copy. It's another instantiation of me, and we're going to be linked. Because one of the persons from, hold on just a second while I try to recall, Carbon Copies. Okay, Keith, I forget Keith's last name. Dr. Keith wrote a book on this, and he was very much into branching identities, okay, that you could do a mind upload, but because they're having different experiences in life, that they drifted into being different entities. And I gave him this idea of a seance to share experiences. Boy, he did not like that. Okay. Okay. He did not buy the idea of seances being able to share time. Okay.
Well, are you referring to Dr. Keith Wiley of
Yes.
Carbon Copies? Okay.
Yes. And I read his book. So he's brilliant. But he and I had a disagreement on the branching identities. One solution to it. He thought it was garbage.
So, Mike, if you want to know what I think with regard to the scenario you describe about the Mike DiVerde robots essentially traversing the universe and sharing their experiences, perhaps once a day, perhaps more frequently, and the robots can absorb what each of the other robots experience very readily, you're going to need a digest version. This sounds to me like you're the boss of these robots, and these robots report to you, just like, for instance, those of us who work in hierarchical organizations would report to our bosses, but our bosses can't possibly know everything that we have been doing because it's too granular and they want a high-level overview or digest. So that is my impression of the scenario that you described.
Okay, but why am I doing this at all? Because the risk of biological me, even if I get the rejuvenation process, is high. There's always a chance I get hit by a bus. Same with all these robots. So we all have to be at the same level, a circle of equals. Absolutely have to be a circle of equals, because any one of us could be eliminated, but this is how you can approach a form of, boy, I probably shouldn't say, but long life beyond thousands of years, okay? There's one word that we always try to avoid when we're talking about superlongevity, right, is I'm not going to live forever, right? But here's a way of eliminating the risk of my being extinguished, is that I have spread the risk in a series of bots that are all me, all equals, all shared experiences, that they can continue on. I'll go on for a second, is kind of typical of me. So I want them all to use thermoelectric generators, which are, I think you've been seeing some reports of some of these that are like 50-year lifetime batteries. And if there were a series of distributed ones throughout the mechanical body, then even if the arm gets sliced off by a bus, you still have other power sources, right? We used to use radioisotopic thermoelectric generators for pacemakers. I think it was, I want to even say a tiny thing of plutonium, but it was encased in foil, and that was sufficient, so there was no radiation. And it was very successful. It worked. It was a long-term source of energy. What was the problem? When people get cremated, you couldn't tell if you extracted that source, and you would have been having plutonium go up the smokestack. Okay, so these radioisotopic thermoelectric generators, RTGs, are used in spacecraft like, I think it was Surveyor and Curiosity both had these. It's a nuclear power source that just continuously generates a little bit of heat. And with certain types of metals, if you put them together and heat them up, they generate electric current. So it's a very simple passive electric source of electrical power. So anyway, so no, the biological me is just as expendable as the rest. I'm not the boss. We're all at the same level, dude.
Well, I would like to see the biological version of you persist indefinitely, but Jason, what did you want to say?
Yeah, I got a little question for, okay, there's this thing that happens like when we see through a camera and like through virtual reality, where we can almost get tricked into thinking that, our body that we're seeing virtually is our real body. We don't really feel like a hand in a jar. Like there's that thing where the camera's pointing down and you see a doll, and then somebody touches your toe at the same time you're seeing the doll get touched on the toe. And after a few, you start to believe it, and then they stab the doll or something crazy, right? So I do think that we have this, kind of unique, uncanny ability to not be a head in a jar. So let's take your thing where you got the 10 different individuals, right? Well, what if, hypothetically speaking, and this might not be your plan exactly, but let's say that those are only active when you are like remotely activating them. So you are seeing through its eyes, like you're really there, feeling everything. It's a real experience for you, okay? And through each one of them, you do that 10 times in 10 different places. You actually had that experience. That was actually you doing stuff, So where is the I-ness there? I still do see Genetics' point in that the I-ness, kind of is in the biological, but it sure makes it a big stretch is if, you're different instantiations of you actually experienced that. It's not just like some robot did some stuff and told you about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do know what you mean. Okay, so let's talk about a couple aspects there. Is one, that feeling that you're describing. I want to say Kahneman did some classic experiments back in the day with people who had, I want to call it ghost pain, but I can't remember the exact term, where people who've been amputated, let's say their leg was amputated, but they have this, their brain keeps telling them that they're having pain in their left ankle. Well, the left ankle's no longer there anymore. So what they did is they put like a mirror down the line so that they were seeing their other leg, and it appeared like they had two legs now. Okay, it was an optical illusion. People do have this sensation of they see something that is like not theirs, but they can project that it is part of them. So that what you're describing, I would call it telerobotics. What you were describing is you're going to activate the robot on Mars. He wakes up and you're living here with him and telling him kind of what to do. That's a telerobotic instantiation. That would be perfectly fine. Okay, that's not what I'm planning to do, but I think that there's people who will do exactly what you're talking about. That they don't want to be on Mars all the time. They just want to go there for the weekend. And then maybe they've sent one of their spaceships out to Saturn, Iapetus. They want to sit there and look at the rings. Okay, and they do that for a few hours, right? Those are all possibles. But let me tell you.
Doesn't that make more sense as a business model to do that? Send robots out there that you can just access remotely. Then you could just sell the connection. If anything, Elon Musk is good at, he's making the connections with this Starlink. That's pretty good. I think you could just get the connection to Mars to where we could all go there virtually. It'd be sweet.
Jason, I think that you got the next $1 trillion industry right there. Okay, I just don't want to do it that way. I know what you're saying. I want to have 11 of me having full days going around. Okay, and so that's perfectly fine. That's perfectly fine. It's just not what I have in mind. Who's next?
Yes. So, question for you, Mike. Do you think your arrangement with 11 of you, or you and 10 Mike DiVerde robots, will transform you into Overman.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think we ought to listen to that song, because that's a fantastic song. And it is the goal, I think, of transcending is what Overman is all about. So that's a fantastic song by an excellent friend of mine. Her stage name is Spectral Valkyrie. Alaura Blackstone is a good friend of mine. I think that's the most beautiful transhumanist song I've ever heard. Thank you very much, Gennady, for playing that. It gets across some of the vision of what we want to do, so most of us anyway. We were talking a little bit about transcending and uploading. Being able to see in multiple spectrum of light simultaneously, UV, microwave, X-ray visions, being able to fly, being able to live forever, I know you're not supposed to say that, but that's one way of attempting, and maybe I'm Icarus. Maybe I'm flying too high and wax melts and I fall. I'm willing to try that. I think it's worth trying. So anyway, thank you very much for playing that song. I really love that song. And I do give my consent to be converted to the Overman. Whoever's singing that song and saying that if I give my consent, I can be Overman. I'm ready. Okay. What do we want to talk about next, Gennady?
All right. So we do have some questions from our audience. Snakes wonders, is there any information about the psychological effects of long-term space travel? He thinks that loneliness and boredom will be a major problem like in the movie Passengers. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that there are attempts being made on Earth with people who are sequestering themselves in small groups for long periods of time in an effort to simulate that. I think it's a very good attempt, but I don't think that there is very good information. Now, psychological effects of long-term space travel are probably only going to be found out really for sure by doing long-term space travel, right? I mean, the ones that they're doing on Earth right now to simulate that life is very good. And I'm not that optimistic about it, right? Especially if it's small groups of people. I think that most of us get a version of cabin fever pretty easily. And I think that that's a significant risk. But I don't know of any deterministic evaluations yet. That's a very good question. There's a long series of questions. The questions that have to be answered before we go are different. So let me just point one thing out with the focus on Mars, with the long travel time and the long time that you're stuck there until Mars and Earth come back together. I'm really puzzled why we aren't just doing moon. Now, I know NASA is going to set up a moon base, but that's not the emphasis that I'm hearing, because most people don't think that the moon is terraformable. And there are idiots who think that you can go nuke Mars and terraform it. And I think my concern with something like that is the long-term viability. If, let's say, you nuke Mars and it works out badly and makes it forever radiation poisoned, that's going to ruin it for centuries, right? Why not use something more thought through and gradual? Going back to the moon, you're only 3 days away, not 2 years away from coming back home. Let's say you took a 6-month trip to Mars, you got there and there was something about it, you just found out, oh my God, I really cannot stand living in this tunnel anymore. You have no way back in time, right? If you go to the moon and you try it there and you find out you've got a real serious, significant health problem or psychological problem, you're just a 3-day cruise back home. So anyway, I think that it'd be far smarter for us to set up a permanently manned moon base. It's close to home. It's very nice, very stable. I don't understand the rush to Mars right now at all. So that was a good question. Go ahead. What's next?
I could add one thing, and I agree with you about the moon, but going back to this idea about ice cap on Mars, what's the morality on this? I mean, why should the first guy to get there be able to just ruin it? I mean,
well,
be able to go there and ruin it for everyone?
Actually, I think we're going to go back to this sort of libertarian attitude that earthlings have no jurisdiction on the planet of Mars. And since we're there and we're free to do whatever we want, who's going to stop us? Who has the right to stop us? So, Jason, what I'm pulling on is there is a long-term perspective, a long-termism that is not apparent in some of the plans. And therefore, I mean, and maybe they're joking about nuking Mars. Who knows? We know that there is some water at the poles on Mars. Maybe they think that by liberating that water, that they'll thicken the atmosphere and they'll do climate change on a grand scale. They'll give it an atmosphere and they'll warm it up, and then it'll become Earth-like. I think that there's a risk that it all goes south on them and pollutes that planet with radiation forever. So, you can tell I'm not a proponent, right?
So is there a way to introduce an atmosphere on Mars without resorting to nuclear weapons in the proximate future, say in the next few decades?
Here's the problem I have, and we will probably start talking about this pretty soon, is the difference in gravity. I think that there's a real reason why Mars does not have an atmosphere. Perhaps it has to do with its atmosphere, with its gravity. Now, why does Venus have a thick sulfuric acid atmosphere and Mars does not? Let me say this, right? Like I said earlier, I'm not an astrophysicist. I'm not an astrobiologist. I'm also not very good at geoengineering, okay? So it's a good question. Is there a way to build up an atmosphere safely on Mars? I don't know. You can tell, I think nuking it is a dumb idea, right? How would you do it? Well, let's think back on Earth's history. It was not always an oxygen planet, was it? Okay. I think that ocean life was part of the oxygen generation, and then plant life certainly was. That it was absorbing the carbon dioxide that was prevalent on the planet and started emitting oxygen. That certainly increased the oxygen levels. There might be a way to, when we talk about gray goo, right? A lot of us like nanotech. There might be a safe nanotech version where you, and this actually goes back to one of those Star Trek movies where she infected the inside of a hollow asteroid and life went across the entire inside surface. There might be a way to use nanotech to introduce biological like entities that eat the rock and exhale oxygen. I don't know, right? And what's the chance that those things mutate and then when you go there they eat you alive? I don't know, right? It's just you could get your oxygen but then have a planet with toxic bacteria. Here, this is where I'm trying to slow everybody down and say, not one guy, just like Jason was saying, not one guy should be able to say, let's go do this and ruin an entire planet. I'm a big proponent of technocracy. I like having all the PhDs wrangle over it and do small scale experiments and gradually work their way forward. Not one guy just detonating nukes. But that's me. We'll see what happens.
Yes, thank you for your response. And I'm interested in your thoughts as to two other potential approaches to human space exploration and development, which may be a bit more gradual in nature. One is an orbital habitat like the Stanford Torus or the O'Neill cylinder, which were proposed in the 1970s. And the idea is those habitats are entirely man-made. They could be in the Earth's orbit or the orbit of whatever planet one would wish them to be in. And hypothetically, they could be constructed of radiation-resistant materials. And the other option is essentially just to build up from Earth. And I'm thinking of megastructures, including a space elevator potentially, but focus on engineering skyscrapers that eventually take us outside the Earth's atmosphere and essentially keep building out for a long time and see how far we can go. So what are your thoughts as to each of these approaches?
Yeah, so I was in junior high when O'Neill came out with his asteroid mining and some of the extremely large space habitats. And I remember saying in high school that I was going to go mine asteroids. Okay, that was 50 years ago or something. Anyway, so I really like the idea of capturing a metal-rich asteroid, hollowing it out, using the materials there to create living space, the potential of being able to gradually introduce a certain amount of rotation to it to make an artificial gravity. I think that those are all wonderful ideas. There were versions I remember of going out to the asteroid belt, finding one suitable, and expelling waste rock out the back as your propellant as a way of changing its orbit. And it wouldn't have to come that close to Earth, right? You don't want it to. You don't want to make a mistake with something like that. But I think that that is a very, very good idea, okay? I think that there's lots of ways for you to build in magnetic shielding because you're going to need a very large energy source is my expectation, right? To develop a magnetic shield around you to protect you is going to need something like nuclear fusion, nuclear fission, something like that. Perhaps solar arrays, I don't know. It doesn't matter. I think that that's a very good approach, okay? And I look forward to that. I think that that's a good way to go, frankly. And it is gradual, and it is something you can design without ruining another planet, okay? So there's a lot of benefits. You can keep it relatively close to Earth, okay, but not as far away as Mars is, but that would be a place where people could live. Now, on the, I tend to describe them as space elevators. That was your other approach. And one of the things I remember saying to somebody a few years ago about those is, as you're building them up, I said, what do you do about micrometeoroids? And you're like, what? And I was like, well, there's things coming in. You see those meteor showers? Okay, those are like rocks and stuff coming from space at 22,000 miles an hour. If they impact on your elevator, and then, okay, you've gone completely blown apart the center of it. And then the rest of it up there is maybe not as stable. So I like the orbiting O'Neill cylinders, these very large ones. The elevators I'm quite concerned about structural failures for a lot of different reasons. Of course, when we were first talking about this, 9/11 had not occurred, so the idea of sabotage or somebody flying a missile, a drone, into these space elevators hadn't even occurred to me. Now you've got people out there that would probably do something like that. So I feel less enthusiastic about the space elevators. You asked, that's where I'm at. I always joke about if you ask 10 engineers their opinions, you'll get 16 answers, right? Because there's all kinds of options and possibilities.
Yes, well, thank you for your assessment of each of these approaches. So it seems that your outlook is in the near-term future, we should focus on creating a moon base, creating orbital habitats, and also sending robots to farther off destinations and eventually having those robots be able to essentially integrate with humans and provide very direct feedback about their explorations.
True. And one of the things we haven't discussed a whole lot is the cost effectiveness of robotic exploration. Okay. Manned space is always an incredibly expensive endeavor. And so if you've got a limited budget and you want to see what's going on in space, you want to go with robots and not with humans. And I'm thinking that the OmniFuturists were quite concerned that cognitive automation, artificial intelligence, and plus robotics is going to supplant most humans in jobs. The same thing applies to things you would do in space, is that it would be more cost effective to be sending out the bots to do the exploration. I'm not convinced that you got to drag the ravioli and the beef the water and the magnetic shielding over to Mars to find out what's going on Mars. I think that if you had robots there and they get wiped out by radiation, who cares? It's just some metal structures, okay? I don't think that what we would be sending would have consciousness or rights of life. They're machines, they're very intelligent machines, but the risk of losing them is very low. The risk of losing a human life is very high. And so I would prefer that we focus on the cost-effective solution of using bots. I heard Jason talking about his version that I've never really considered that much, of sending a bot out and you're looking through it like telerobotics, and you're telling it what to do, or you're thinking about what it should do, and it's doing it. And if it gets crushed by a meteor, too bad. Okay, I'm still sitting here in my comfy chair eating cheese balls and drinking Pepsi. Okay, I think that that's the right approach. Cost effectiveness is very important because, and this is, by the way, I had planned to do a nice series on this topic with my good friend Rusty Burridge on his podcast, Humanity Unshackled. And we do plan to go through in depth the cost effectiveness over time of all of the robotic spacecraft as compared to what we spent on human spaceflight. So let me give you an example. I've told you I was a primary structure lead engineer on the space station. Gennady, would you care to guess how much American taxpayers spent on the International Space Station?
I would imagine it would be somewhere in the tens of billions of dollars.
$100 billion on something that's 250 miles away. Okay. Okay. And think for a minute about the number of robot spacecraft you could have sent all over the solar system by now to determine things like, what is the radiation level near Jupiter? We do know that Jupiter has relatively high radiation levels, okay? What are some of the best moons to land on? Luckily, I think many of you may have seen that NASA approved Dragonfly, which is going to be a flying robot spacecraft that goes to Titan. Now, what's going to be interesting about Titan with all that methane and so forth, they've got the hydrocarbons on, it rains on Titan, okay? One of the problems is going to be seeing that the atmosphere is so thick. Now, I understand that maybe the clouds are up and down closer to the ground. I think we landed on Titan and the view was relatively clear, but very toxic environment, right? We're going to be able to fly around on Titan and see what it's like. It's got lakes, it rains methane. I mean, this is the sort of thing we ought to be doing. I think the program is going to be like a $3 billion program, okay? So anyway, I really think we'd be far more cost effective by sending bots.
All right, thank you for that response. And Jason had a question. Is it easier to design unmanned systems or manned systems?
Oh, that's easy. Unmanned, easily. And I've worked on both, right? So the rocket programs that I've been on, I was on Delta 3 and Delta 4 rockets. And for a period of time, I was at SpaceX and I worked on the Dragon spacecraft. I left before Falcon 9 had its first flight, but my design for cargo CRS-2, number 2, so this was a cargo flight, unmanned cargo flight to the space station, and it took up some like 600-pound tools. They're called grapple fixtures for the thermal radiator system on the space station. I have a really cool photograph of the space station truss I worked on. The SpaceX Dragon docked, the robot arm reaching in and pulling out these tools that I designed the support for. So both space projects at the same time. There is no question, unmanned is way easier than doing manned systems. Okay, it's not just the safety aspects, it's also the life support systems. Okay, so no, and this, Jason, it's an excellent question, and because it's easier and lower risk, it's cheaper. It's always cheaper. And I was talking a little bit about the series with Rusty Burridge. He's recovering from an unfortunate accident. Rusty and I are going to talk about it's like an order of magnitude more cost effective to do robot unmanned spacecraft than it is manned. Okay, so you get 10 times more bang to the buck. And what he and I will be talking about is the facts that support that assertion, right? And the details, right? But we would be getting a lot more out of NASA if they shut down a lot of their manned space for a while. That's my opinion.
Well, interesting outlook on this. And Jason also points out that robots can be there on other planets building human habitats. Now, realistically, how long do you think it would take if we use this approach of sending out robots first to create a habitable environment for humans such that they would not be subject to the risks of excessive radiation exposure or other hazards, and then a manned mission could be sent and people could just start living in the structures that the robots constructed?
Well, I would outline 20 years. I would spend the next 20 years with robots building the structures. I saw recently some note about a contract going out to build a railroad system on the moon. There's no roads on the moon, so how do you get cargo from one spot to another, right? Robots could be doing that, laying down infrastructure for things like railroads and building tunnels. And by the way, measuring what is the radiation environment and constructing different types of safe enclosures and habitats for humans, and measuring, is it really safe over time, or does the design fail in some mode, right? So I would leave from now until like 2040 as we should be doing the development, building the structures so that people can go, because we do want people to go. That's not, the object isn't to say no people can go. That's not right. We want to set it up so we know that they'll be safe.
Yes, and that is quite an important point. Our friend John H. writes that robots are excellent and have their place, but humans being humans, we eventually want to go to places in person.
John's right. John's exactly right. Now, let's talk about, I know we're starting to run out of time, but I wanted to bring up one other topic. Once you say, let's say that at some point in the future, you got 1 million people on Mars. Okay, young man, young woman, they fall in love, they decide to have a family, they have a baby on Mars. Okay, it's very clear, if anybody here watches any of the astronauts or cosmonauts after they've been in microgravity for a year, they can't even walk. Okay, their bone density is lower, their muscle mass is lower, their strength is lower, they're very feeble. Okay, one of the problems a baby born on Mars is going to have is that none of its muscle or skeleton, I almost try to combine those two into something like musculoskeletal system. I know there's a term like that, but I can never say it. Its muscular system and its skeletal system is not going to be strong enough to be able to withstand the gravity on Earth. And here's the problem is, let's say that these 1 million people are on Mars and some sort of pathogen wipes out a bunch of people and they have to evacuate. And the only place to go is Earth. Okay. Now, for the folks who are about to tell me, well, they can exercise so they can be strong enough. Okay, I'm going to give you a hypothetical. I'm going to get the number wrong on purpose, Gennady, but let's say Gennady is a 200-pound man, which he isn't, but let's say he is, okay? And we give him something to knock him out during the night. He can't wake up for that night. He's sleeping. And we put on him 400 pounds iron outfit, okay? He's going to become Iron Man. He doesn't know it. He wakes up in the morning. He doesn't weigh 200. He weighs 600 pounds. his gravity has tripled in effect. Can you get out of bed with 400 pounds of stuff on you, Gennady?
Probably not.
Probably not. Okay. And so I'm just trying to tell you folks that once you're born on Mars, you're stuck. Okay. Yes, your genetics were built for life on Earth, but it's more than just genetics. You have to have the stress daily of your heart pumping blood against the force of gravity, right? Like it's doing now, taking blood from my toes to my feeble brain and back. Okay. My arms that lift up and down, they're used to a certain gravity field. So this is another long-term aspect. So when John H. is correct, people want to travel, but we have to think about if you're establishing permanent residence on Mars and something occurs or somebody wants to come back to Earth, if they were born on Mars, they're probably stuck. They're probably a prisoner. Okay, so
yes, thank you for pointing out that concern, and this will indeed take some thought to overcome, especially for future humans who may be born in lower gravity environments. Now I would like to get to some questions from our panelists. Let's start with Ben Ballweg.
Thanks for coming, Mike. You've answered some fun questions. I got a really dry one for you that I bet you'll make amazing somehow. How about this one? What are some of the main construction differences of flying aircraft in gravity versus weightless spaces?
That is actually a fascinating one because, and you're talking about construction activities. And one of the interesting things that we struggled with on the space station design was how do the astronauts construct the space station? As versus like, let's say, aircraft that we do here on the ground in a normal factory. And one of the interesting things about it was that the environment, it has a lot of hot environment, right? Solar radiation hits there, so we had to be worried about touch temperatures of the metal as you moved it, as you held it, as we've all seen science fiction films where the astronaut is moving along some sort of a space station. The touch temperature on all that is very difficult. The other aspect of it, if any of you remember when the shuttle astronauts went up to rescue a spacecraft. So there was a spacecraft that had launched into the wrong orbit. And so the space shuttle came up next to it. The astronauts went out and the robot arm had trouble snagging the spacecraft. Okay, that was the first plan, was use a grapple fixture to grab it. Okay, because the fuel had been rotating, there was a rotational inertia in there. Okay, and once the arm it touched without grabbing, it actually started wobbling. Okay, so now you got a wobbling 11,000 pound spacecraft out there. So they sent these 3 astronauts out there and they had to grab onto it simultaneously and wait for that fuel to stop rotating. So they held it for a very long time. And then we were able to grapple it. Okay, so the dynamics of how things move in space are unlike what we're used to. Okay, and you're right. As we do it more often, we get more experience and we know how to handle some of this stuff. But some parts obviously are easier to do and some are much more complicated.
It's interesting because Francois Joanneau in our chat writes, robots and artificial gravity can solve some of the problems that you've been discussing. So the problem of people, for example, being born in a low gravity environment, maybe as part of their fitness regimen, they could go in every day to a higher gravity environment, and it wouldn't initially be the Earth's gravity. It would be like a test chamber of 1.1 times Mars's gravity, and then it gets dialed up to 1.2, 1.3, 1.4 times until ultimately maybe in 15 years or when they reach the age of maturity, they're ready to take a tour to Earth, and that may be like a rite of passage for these Martian kids,
Okay.
where they finally can step on Earth and do fine because they've been trained in these incrementally higher gravity environments.
Yeah. And there are these kinds of possibilities. I don't want to downplay them. However, how many of them have been thoroughly vetted? Artificial gravity is not that easy to create. Okay, I don't know of many methods other than rotating a large spacecraft to create artificial gravity. Okay, and then, okay, that may be an approach. How long does it take to acclimate? And frankly, I expected most of these transhumanists to say, well, you can strap on some sort of exoskeleton. But the problem is a lot of the internal organ problems more than, being able to have enough force to pick up your cup of coffee. What's next?
Yes, so let's go to Art Ramon for his question.
Okay, I was trying to think. You said, okay, the mute's off. Elon Musk, he's not concerned with individual survival. I think he's concerned with species survival. And the fact that he's concerned with species survival so much that he wants to get this project going in a hurry kind of concerns me. That maybe they know something they don't want to say because, what if that Apophis asteroid is going to hit us in 2029? What would happen to society on this planet if people knew that? So, maybe they want to get their bunkers prepared for the people who want to ride it out here. And then as a failsafe, they want to get a few people on a different planet. And preferably, I would say Mars, because it has more gravity than the moon, I would say.
Yep.
And then hopefully get enough materials out there to make them viable long term until they can maybe return to this planet. So that concerns me, and you hear a lot of conspiracy theories. I know they're all out there, especially with the current, contemporary UAP conspiracy theories, which I think they're plausible. I just think they can't become common because they could be used, destructively. If you have a craft that can go, close to the speed of light and then you ram it into the planet, well, then there goes our planet. So you don't want someone trying to accelerate the end of the world because they think it's their religious duty to do so. So that might be a reason why that technology needs to be suppressed for now, and we have to deal with this, outdated rocketry. So can you envision any scenario why there would be a hurry? What do you know?
Well, actually, I know nothing, but very recently I had a good friend of mine who came up to me and said, why are all these billionaires building bunkers, Mike? What is going on? I go, I don't know. Paranoia is all I can think of. I think that even with a catastrophe, humanity will survive. I think that with 1 billion of us spread across the planet, no matter how bad the catastrophe is, I think that a few of us will survive, as we have previous extinction events. I'm going to rephrase it one more time, is that I think that there's no rush, that more than likely humanity as a species will survive the next 20 years without having another planet to be on. Okay. And I think that it's laudable. Let me rephrase this. Okay. One of the things that occurred in my life is that the early life that I had, the first 10 years, people were extremely enthusiastic about space travel. And part of it was this horseshit about where the Russians are going to beat us. Okay. And they never were very good. Okay. So now you're hearing stories about how the Chinese might beat us to the moon or something. Give me a break. Okay. Of course not. Okay. Some of these scare tactics help industry keep their projects going. Okay. I think that there's no rush to go start a colony on Mars. I think that if we were to spend the next 20 years thoughtfully and carefully preparing, we'd have a very good outcome. And so that's all I'm asking for. So to answer your question more succinctly, Art, no, I don't know of any reason why we have to get humans off the planet permanently in the next 10 years. I don't get it. I really don't get it.
All right, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mike, for your response. I do think we need to send humans back to the moon because it's a disgrace that the Apollo program was canceled in 1972 and humans have not gone back there for 52 years now. But our friend John H. points out that in the event of a catastrophe, a worldwide catastrophe, humankind might survive, but civilization would be thrown back by centuries. And if civilization is thrown back by centuries, we might not get another chance at space exploration or expansion until we regain our current level of development. And we have seen with historic dark ages, this can take centuries, if not longer. So let's try to avoid a worldwide catastrophe, especially a man-made catastrophe like a nuclear war, in the next 2 decades at least. Daniel, do you have a question that can be answered in the last 3.5 minutes?
Well, you kind of led up to it. You know, we've had 5 previous mass extinctions, and the evidence seems to be that we're in a 6th mass extinction. And a lot of people think this could be the narrow window we have to actually go biocosmic, you know, or to move life beyond the womb planet. So I happen to think that we need to get closed system ecosystems right on Earth, and we can do that by an equatorial harbor with human rights curated very robustly before we try to aggressively go out into space. But I think, you know, we do need to have that inspiration factor. You know, robots don't have the same inspiration of an actual human who's doing actual exploration with actual skin in the game. And, you know, I think Disneyland was so great because, I mean, my God, they had an inner space ride, they had an underwater ride, they had Rocket to the Moon ride, they had a Haunted Mansion ride. I mean, they were trying to give kind of a digital twin of all these different possible courses for evolution. And I think that's a great thing that transhumanist friendly folk could be doing, is creating these digital twin experiences and getting it right, but also not losing that sense of urgency that we are in a mass extinction and it might be the final shot for evolution to go cosmic. So I don't know, any thoughts on that?
Sure. Okay. And both of those have valid aspects to them. Okay. Inspiring is a good thing. Okay. But I'm trying to balance inspiring people with astronauts putting the boot on Mars, which is going to be inspiring, and get a lot of kids like me who watch the lunar landings go, man, I want to be a rocket scientist. My 5th grade teacher still remembers me saying in 10 years old, I want to be a rocket scientist. Okay. I mean, that works, but is it worth risking people's lives? So that's the balance, is that inspiration you would like to have. Why can't that inspiration be delayed by a few years, number one? And number two, this extinction event that is being hypothesized, I'm sorry, I don't see any evidence that in the next 20 years we're all going to be extinct. Now, maybe in the next 100, if we keep doing the dumb things we're doing, yes, okay? But there's no reason that why in the next 20 years we have to be on Mars. That's my point, okay? Now, I could be wrong. We could all 8 billion of us dead, or as John H. was pointing out, back in the dark ages for hundreds of years. I think it's unlikely, both of those scenarios, and certainly not worth risking people's lives for. That's my opinion. Are we out of time now, Gennady?
Well, we have about a minute, and I will say thank you very much, Mike, for sharing your thoughts. I think they are most definitely worth considering, and the sequence you propose for space exploration, in my view, is fairly reasonable. I would like to see humans on the moon and on Mars sooner than in 20 years, but I can understand waiting for large-scale space settlement until we can assure safety for large numbers of people. Perhaps in the last 30 seconds, you could answer Maura Abad's question. What is the book that most impacted you to continue learning about space?
Robot Explorers by Robert Gatlin in 1972. Okay, it was a technical book I read when I was 10, and it showed all the cool rocket and robot space explorers. So it's ancient. You probably can't find it, but that you asked me, that was the one. That was the one.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Mike. This has been quite a fascinating conversation, and our audience certainly agrees, and hopefully it will spark many more discussions about the future course of space exploration. And of course, I share your priority placed on human longevity. Hence, I will say, let us all live long and prosper.